Jaya Gopi Jana Bala Girivara Yashodana Dana Vrajana Yashodhanandana Vrajana Yamuna Tera Vanachara Yamuna Tera Jaya Radha Jaya Radha Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Jaya Radha, 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 Jaya Radha, Giri Dhare Radha, Giri Dhare Shri Radha. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya. Vishnupad Paramahansa Paribhajacharya Sutra Shakti Srimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki. Vishnupad Paramahansa Paribhajacharya Sutra Shakti Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Sarasvati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki. Grantarashim Bhagavatam Ki. Gaura Premanandi. Start by reading from the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. We're reading from page 120, which is chapter 7, India Revisited, part 1. This is the room where I compiled Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada told Kirtanananda, I slept here, and over here was my cooker and my typewriter. I would sleep and type and cook and type and sleep and type. Kirtanananda was shocked to think of Swamiji living here in such a poor, humble place. It wasn't even clean. Although Kirtanananda was uncomfortable in his suit and wondered when he would be able to get rid of it, he managed to get a thin mattress for Swamiji. 2 Ayurvedic doctors came. They both agreed that the trouble was Swamiji's heart, but that the danger was now past. They gave him medicines and advised him to keep to a regulated schedule of eating, resting, and working. Sri Krishna Pandit came by to sit and converse, and Prabhupada told him of his success in America and of all the young devotees in New York and San Francisco. Prabhupada played his record for Sri Krishna Pandit, and this drew a crowd of curious persons from other rooms in the temple. In the afternoon, Prabhupada developed a cough. It didn't seem serious, and he said he wanted to travel the next day to Vrindavana. But by evening, the cough had become persistent. He couldn't rest. Kirtanananda tried massages and the pills the Ayurvedic doctors had prescribed, but nothing worked. Prabhupada remained awake all night, and when Kirtanananda touched him in the morning, he was feverish. The doctors came again. Prabhupada's temperature was over 104. They gave teas and Ayurvedic powders, while Kirtanananda looked on skeptically. Because Prabhupada was having a lot of difficulty breathing when he lay down, Kirtanananda thought it might be pneumonia. So Kirtanananda gave him penicillin, for which he had brought a supply. In the afternoon, an elderly sick doctor who practiced Western medicine came by and gave Prabhupada a penicillin injection. Prabhupada then fell asleep and rested quietly for the first time in 24 hours. I'll finish there. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, 1st chapter, text 29. Chapters entitled The Activities of King Priyavrata. In prose, so I will just read this myself. Evam upashama yaneshu svataneyesh ata jagati patir jagatim buddhan yeka dasha parivatsaranam avyaha khila purushakara sara sambrita dor danda yuga lapitita maurviguna stanita Piramita dharma pratik paksho bahishmatash matyash chanu dinam edamana pramoda prasarana yaushinya vrida pramushita hasavaloka ruchira shveli adibhi para puyamana viveka ivanava buddhyamana Eva Mahamana Pubuje. Synonyms, please repeat. Or actually, I might skip this for the sake of time. Translation. After Kavi, Mahavira and Savana were completely trained in the Paramahansa stage of life, Maharaja Priyavrata ruled the universe for 11 arbudas of years. Whenever he was determined to fix his arrow upon his bowstring with his 2 powerful arms, all opponents of the regulative principles of religious life would flee from his presence in fear of the unparalleled prowess he displayed in ruling the universe. He greatly loved his wife, Bahishmati, and with the increase of days, the exchange of nuptial love also increased. By her feminine behavior, as she dressed herself, walked, got up, smiled, laughed, and glanced about, Queen Bahishmati increased his energy. Thus, although he was a great soul, he appeared lost in the feminine conduct of his wife. He behaved with her just like an ordinary man, but actually he was a great soul. Purport. In this verse, the word dharma pratikpaksha, Opponents of religious principles refers not to a particular faith, but to Varnashram Dharma, the division of society socially and spiritually into four Varnas, Brahmanas, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, and four ashramas, Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. To maintain proper social order and help the citizens gradually progress toward the goal of life, namely spiritual understanding, the principles of Varnashram Dharma must be accepted. From this verse, Maharaj Priyavrata appeared to have been so strict in maintaining this institution of Varnashram Dharma that anyone neglecting it would immediately flee from its presence as soon as the king warned them by fighting or administering light punishment. Indeed, Maharaj Priyavrata would not have to fight, for simply because of his strong determination, they dared not disobey the rules and regulations of Varnashram Dharma. It is said that unless human society is regulated by Varnashram Dharma, it is no better than a bestial society of cats and dogs. Maharaj Priyavrata therefore strictly maintained Varnashram Dharma by his extraordinary, unparalleled prowess. To maintain such a life of strict vigilance, one needs encouragement from his wife. In the Varnashram Dharma system, certain classes, such as the Brahmanas and Sannyasis, do not need encouragement from the opposite sex. Kshatriyas and Grihastas, however, actually need the encouragement of their wives in order to execute their duties. Indeed, a Grihasta or Kshatriya cannot properly execute his responsibilities without the association of his wife. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu personally admitted that a Grihasta must live with a wife. Kshatriyas were even allowed to have many wives to encourage them in discharging the duties of government. The association of a good wife is necessary in a life of karma and political affairs. To execute his duties properly, therefore, Maharaj Priyavrata took advantage of his good wife, Bahishmati, who was always very expert in pleasing her great husband by properly dressing herself, smiling, and exhibiting her feminine bodily features. Queen Bahishmati always kept Maharaj Priyavrata very encouraged, and thus he executed his governmental duty very properly. In this verse, Iva has twice been used to indicate that Maharaj Priyavrata acted exactly like a henpecked husband, and thereby seemed to have lost his sense of human responsibility. Actually, however, he was fully conscious of his position as a spirit soul, and though he seemingly behaved like an acquiescent karmi husband, Maharaj Priyavrata thus ruled the universe for 11 arbudas of years. One arbuda consists of 100 million years, and Maharaj Priyavrata ruled the universe for 11 such arbudas. Om Jnanatimmirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama. I'll read the translation one more time. After Kavi, Mahavira, and Savana were completely trained in the Paramahansa stage of life, Maharaj Priyavrata ruled the universe for 11 arbudas of years. Whenever he was determined to fix his arrow upon his bowstring with his two powerful arms, all opponents of the regulative principles of religious life would flee from his presence in the fear of unparalleled prowess he displayed in ruling the universe. He greatly loved his wife Bahishmati, but with the increase of days, their exchange of nuptial love also increased. By feminine behavior, as she dressed herself, walked, got up, smiled, laughed, and glanced about, Queen Bahishmati increased his energy. Thus, although he was a great soul, he appeared lost in the feminine conduct of his wife. He behaved with her just like an ordinary man, but actually, he was a great soul. These accounts of Maharaj Priyavrata are very amazing. Never have we witnessed in recent human history any king, any ruler, prime minister, president, who accomplished the things that Maharaj Priyavrata did in his time. Never again would we see such a person, at least not in this lifetime. Both in the translation and purport, there were many things that came up to me. But for the sake of keeping things concise, I thought I'd share a few things that stood out to me and share some reflections that came to mind as I was thinking about them. So I decided to create, quote unquote, 3 E's to describe the activities of Maharaj Priyavrata. 3 words that stood out to me within the purport, which describe Maharaj Priyavrata's situation. And from these 3 words, we can draw 3 lessons, actually many lessons. The first E was extraordinary. Making reference to the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, Maharaj Priyavrata therefore strictly maintained Varnashram Dharma by his extraordinary, unparalleled prowess. This in of itself is not a very easy feat, because as we understand, when the living entities enter into the material world, there's a tendency towards being rebellious. There's a tendency for the living entity to want to be selfish and engage in sense gratification at the expense of others and at the expense of the ultimate purpose of life. Maharaj Priyavrata, through his strength, through his determination, he was able to govern the entire kingdom in such a way that no one would ever consider stepping out of Varnashram Dharma, stepping out of line and disobeying his orders. Any that did, any of those who were stubborn enough to do that, they would just run away in his presence. They wouldn't try to directly oppose him. But this was one of his glories. If we look at the situation today, briefly, and we see the state of human affairs, how far we've fallen from Varnashram Dharma, not only just in the West, but all around the world. You can imagine it would take a miracle. It would take an extremely mighty human being to be able to bring people again back onto the path of Dharma. In fact, some of us may think it's impossible. But Srila Prabhupada, he had instructed his disciples in many ways to think of how you can re-establish Varnashram Dharma within society. I recently asked my own spiritual master how we could do that, given that already we see a particular type of human society established. People are very much immersed in consumerism, capitalism, communism in various parts of the world. How can we expect to re-establish Varnashram Dharma in such situations? But my spiritual master told me, and it was in a class setting, so the rest of the class as well, that we can at least start to think about it. And Srila Prabhupada did give some advice in the matter as well. So Maharaj Priyavrata, he was, through his extraordinary, unparalleled prowess, able to maintain Varnashram Dharma within his whole kingdom. And not only that, by his own prowess, he was able to light up the parts of the universe that had no light when the sun was at a distant place. And he was able to do that through the effulgence, the illumination of his own chariot. So one may look at this and think this is fantasy. But for those of us who accept Srimad Bhagavatam as an authoritative source of knowledge, we understand that actually this is a history. This happened. Reflecting on this idea, the extraordinary prowess of Maharaj Priyavrata, I was thinking of how by worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead, devotees can become extraordinary. We have the obvious examples in recent history of Srila Prabhupada, who at the age of 69, who was able to create a whole movement, establish 108 temples, gain so many followers, dedicated followers, at such an old age. Some of us on the call may even be close to 69 or older than 69. When we're young, we can't necessarily imagine how it must feel to be old, to be 69, and to have to do anything. What to speak of start a worldwide movement like Srila Prabhupada did at the age of 69. We understand, at least theoretically, that the body becomes very much diminished in energy, and that it becomes hard to just perform the daily functions at a certain point. But Srila Prabhupada was so extraordinary that he did the work of 1,000 men at the ripe old age of 69. I was also reflecting on how we may be witnessing extraordinary feats take place in our life around us every day, but we may take them for granted. We may be seeing many devotees in the vicinity that we live in performing extraordinary feats, but because we're surrounded by them every day, we become accustomed, to both their good sides and maybe they're not as good sides, and we tend to overlook all the extraordinary feats that they're performing every day. To state a few that I was remembering in this ashram, during the marathon, single devotees were selling $15,000 of Prabhupada's books within a month. So the way it works for us is that you pay for the books and you pay for them at BBT price, but we sell them for double BBT. That's just the way we do it here, which makes it even more difficult in some ways, especially when you're traveling around New Zealand where many people are on the benefit, many people are poor. But somehow or another, some devotees were able to distribute up to $15,000 of books within a month. And if you break that down, that's making $3,500 a week. So you'd be hard pressed to make that at even a well-paying job. But they were doing this on the street, selling religious books of all things. So in one sense, you could say this is extraordinary, because on top of that, we're also existing in Kali Yuga, the most irreligious age. And as well as that, we're also in New Zealand, where generally people aren't very religious at all. New Zealand is known, unlike America, to be an irreligious country. So many factors working against them, yet they still perform such amazing feats. We see within this ashram devotees who have performed decades of dedicated service with serious sadhana, reading 2 hours a day, chanting up to 40 rounds or more a day. This is extraordinary, especially in the age that we live in. Of course, things are relative, but we're not going to go there. Satya Yuga, different type of people, but we're looking at Kali Yuga, the hardest age to practice Krishna consciousness and spirituality, yet still there are serious sadhakas who dedicate every day of their lives for decades in serious absorption in the holy name and hearing Srila Prabhupada's books. What to speak of serving and helping others. And also more recently, a few devotees in the ashram have chosen to take up some very austere diets, eating things like potatoes with no salt, celery juice with cayenne pepper, diet, no salt, no spices, no sugar, no oil. Obviously for health reasons, but still to me, this is pretty extraordinary. Who, think about it. Who does that sort of thing in material life? Who could do that sort of thing? So yes, there are many extraordinary feats that the devotees are performing around us every day. The second E that came up in the purport was encouragement. Queen Bahishmati always kept Maharaj Priyavata very encouraged, and thus he executed his governmental duties very properly, Srila Prabhupada states. So it's understood that Kshatriyas and Grihastas, they require certain types of inspiration, namely the inspiration of their wife to continue performing their duties with great determination and great vigilance. As the saying goes, behind every great man is a great woman. It's even seen in the lives of celebrities, Olympic athletes, that some who do very well in their career, they have a very supportive wife in the background. There was one particular MMA fighter who was becoming famous when I was becoming a devotee. He had must have been like 10 consecutive wins or something, which is quite big in the MMA world. And he was moving his way up. He himself admitted throughout his career that he would doubt himself, and he didn't know that whether he could achieve the goals that he had laid out for himself. But he gained a lot of inspiration and encouragement from his wife. His wife who was loyal to him, who supported him when he needed it. And that way, he was able to accomplish feats which he never thought was possible for himself alone. So he gave a lot of credit to his wife. So we see this principle, it applies at all times. Again, behind every great man, behind all of his accomplishments, you can generally see that a great woman is there helping him from behind. Obviously, we have exceptions, those in the renounced order, but I'm just speaking generally. And in general, devotees, ideally, we should get our inspiration from hearing and chanting. We should get encouragement from reading Prabhupada's books. We should get direction and advice from reading Prabhupada's books, and encouragement and inspiration from chanting the holy name. This is the highest. But many of us, because we have a human side as well, we may also need encouragement through the form of friendships and good relationships. We may also get encouragement or inspiration from being absorbed in a service or a project. And believe it or not, because we are human, after all, we are spiritual beings having a human experience, it's nice also to hear encouraging words from our fellow devotees. This can actually make a bigger difference than we think in the life of any of the devotees around us. Encouragement, acknowledgement, appreciation, all of these things are natural human needs. And a common misconception when we become devotees, because we tend to become transcendental before we become human, is that we shouldn't desire any praise for what we do at all. We also we generally tend to not give as much to others as a result, because it's Maya. But this is a misconception. Sometimes also it can be the case that we're more likely to give critical feedback to others rather than positive feedback. Without thinking, we just become maybe a little bit insensitive to the people around us. But there's a quote which I found quite interesting, which goes, "Negative words can plant seeds of doubt that grow into forests of insecurity." So we have to be careful about what we say, because once spoken, discouraging words can disempower a person to the point that they can believe that they're useless, even if they're extremely competent. And the same works vice versa. Someone who may be not so competent at a certain point in time, but who receives words of encouragement, can gain such inspiration, such motivation, that they can achieve things which they never thought was possible. And when I was learning the mridanga, very early on in my mridanga career, which hasn't gone very far, but still, I felt a little bit insecure about the fact that I, couldn't play very well. And one time I played in a kirtan, thinking that I'd done a rubbish job. And the devotee said to me, they just complimented me and told me that my mridanga playing was really good. and it was very solid. And deep down, it gave me a lot of inspiration to continue playing mridanga when I was on the verge of potentially giving up because I felt like my progress was so slow. It was such a small thing, but I noted that actually, just like everybody else, I'm also human and I need encouragement. So what does that say for the others in our lives? Because they're human too. Moving on to the third E. The third E that stood out to me from the purport was the word elevated. It wasn't stated directly, but for the sake of keeping, consistency, it was said in the purport that Maharaj Priyavrata was fully conscious of his position as a spirit soul, although he seemingly behaved like an acquiescent karmi husband. So to the eyes of others, in Maharaj Priyavrata's relationship and interactions with his wife, he may have looked like he was a henpecked husband. In modern Western terms, you'd use the term whipped. I'll leave, if you don't know what that means, you can think about it. In any case, externally, Maharaj Priyavrata seemed to be influenced by his wife, but as we understand from the purport, internally, he was actually in highly elevated consciousness. This was due to the benediction that Lord Brahma gave him in text 19, where Lord Brahma said, "My dear Priyavrata, seek shelter inside the opening in the lotus feet of the Lord, whose navel is also like a lotus. Thus conquer the 6 sense organs, the mind and the knowledge-acquiring senses. Accept material enjoyment because the Lord extraordinarily has ordered you to do this. You will thus always be liberated from material association and be able to carry out the Lord's orders in your constitutional position." What we can get from this particular verse is that if one receives the blessings, the instruction of a devotee in the parampara to perform a particular service, which may seem from an external perspective very materially entangling, that by following that order that comes in parampara, they'll be protected. They won't necessarily forget their constitutional position, as Maharaj Priyavrata was able to do. He was able to remember his constitutional position throughout all his service as a king, which, as you can imagine, is very materially entangling. We have the ideal example of someone who showed that even in, again, very demanding material circumstances, even having so many responsibilities and obligations, it is still possible to remain Krishna conscious. It's not that you just have to remain a brahmachari or a renunciate, and it's not just that they're the only ones who have a chance to go back to Godhead. Actually, everybody has the opportunity to go back to Godhead if they manage their life properly and if they are following the orders of their guru and parampara. The obvious example that came to mind when I heard this verse in purport was Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who had a whopping 13 kids. It's said in the 12th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam that if a man in Kali Yuga is simply able to maintain a wife and 2 kids, he'll be considered very expert. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur was able to maintain 13 kids. And not only that, his occupation was very demanding. He was a government magistrate. It was said that his role was very prestigious. It was also very demanding, and it required him to handle very complex cases, maintain law and order within the state that he was in, and of course, involves a lot of administration. So add that to 13 kids. Well, even if you just hear the 13 kids, you may think already it's impossible. It would be impossible to remain Krishna conscious in such a situation. But he had 13 kids. He was a government magistrate. And on top of that, despite his professional career, it was said that he was a prolific writer and preacher of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. He wrote over 100 books in Sanskrit, Bengali and English, and he was quite instrumental in reviving the teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu within India and leading to it being revived within the whole world. What we can draw from his example is that, yes, you can still remain Krishna conscious, even having so many materially entangling obligations and responsibilities. We understand he was a special soul, he was a Nitya Siddha. People can always pull out that excuse. But still, Krishna, he understands where we're at, he understands what we're capable of, and he understands what we're dealing with. So with that in mind, we may find having one child, or we may find just managing ourselves is hard enough. But Krishna sees the effort. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he revealed that while offering worship to his household deities, he experiences home becoming spiritually transformed into Vaikuntha. So one can say this is the epitome of Grihastha life, being able to see Vaikuntha, or your home is Vaikuntha. My Guru Maharaj often says that this is called bhakti mysticism. Like how Jesus said, being in the world but not of the world. So to conclude and summarize, these three E's that I stated, extraordinary, encouragement, and elevated. Yeah, these were things that stood out to me in the purport. Obviously, there's a lot more there. I acknowledge that. And even in just contemplating these three E's, we may come up with many other reflections of our own. The E for extraordinary, that can be summarized by saying that by the Lord's grace, a devotee can accomplish wonderful things, unimaginable, even to the most competent materialist. Encouragement. By the encouragement of others, devotees can feel inspired to do things which they may not have thought as possible. And elevated. The devotee is not disconnected from the world that he lives in physically, but he lives differently from it in his values, through his actions, and by their spiritual focus. And that way, while being in the world, they can be elevated beyond the world consciously. And that was what stood out to me. I'll finish there. And if anyone has any comments or questions, please let me know. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
So much explaining this text in a very elaborated way, especially the three key points you raised, three E's, on how these three influenced King Priyabrata's life. And you have pointed out these 3 points: extraordinary prowess, encouragement, and elevation. It's really very wonderfully explained. Lastly, the one is the elevation with the example of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. It shows even if you are in the material life, still you can perform the spiritual activities in a very elevated way. And that's what the inspiration was given to Priyabrata by Brahmaji. He was trying to convince him that though you are a very elevated stage, but still you can perform your material life in a very systematic way, and that blessing is given from the Lord himself. So text 19, it shows the same thing, that elevation is already granted by the Lord, and he can, even staying in the family life, he could maintain the highest position of his elevation. And that is what he used to practice for years together in meditation, and that practice goes simultaneously, but even still living in the family life. So that's the key point of this text, and Prabhupada has already explained this so nicely. The Varnashram system can easily be maintained even in this age. Only thing is your perception towards it need to be very, very systematic. As you mentioned, your Guru Maharaj already explained, and to your question, how he explained to you how to maintain the uh, Varnashram system, like being in the world but not in this world. This is so important presentation. It is showing even if you are in this material world, still you can be aloof for your spiritual activities, even though you are in this family life. Thank you so much explaining so nicely in context to Priyabrata Maharaj. It's really wonderful. Thank you once again. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. We have a question here in my ashram. Don't mind.
Thank you for the class.
Yeah.
So I like the point that you raised about efforts and how Krishna knows where we're at, what we're dealing with, what more we can give. Sometimes for us, we might either feel like we're giving enough effort, but we're actually not, or we might be feeling like I'm not giving enough effort, but we are. So it can be difficult for us to tell when we're giving our best, when we have more to give, when we're hitting that mark of giving our best. How can we determine where we're at in that?
So the question asked was, how do we know that we're giving our best? Because sometimes we may feel like we're giving our best, but we could not be. And sometimes we may not feel like we're giving our best, but then Krishna, he acknowledges that we are trying our best. I guess the standard answer that I've heard before is that we can know whether we're trying our best, first of all, by getting perspective from others. That's why we have mentors. That's why we have devotees who we can discuss our spiritual lives with. And they can see whether you're exerting yourself properly. They can give you feedback on, how you can do better if necessary, or they might encourage you to just keep going. When I had a darshan with, our spiritual master, His Holiness Devarita Swami, and generally I feel like I'm not really doing enough. I feel like I can always be doing more. Sometimes I feel guilty when I go to sleep. I'm like, why am I having to sleep more than 6 hours? Why can't I be like Prabhupada and just sleep 2 hours? But when I had a darshan with my spiritual master, I asked him, I genuinely try to ask him, is what I'm doing pleasing you? And this particular time he said yes. Keep going, keep doing what you're doing. And at least in that point in time, I could tell, because he's pleased with my actions, then whatever I've done up until that point has been a success. So in one sense, you could say that's one of the, that's the highest consideration. Is your spiritual master pleased with your efforts? Because if he is, then it doesn't matter in one sense how we feel. But then at the same time, it's always good to feel like we can do more, because the spiritual master may be pleased at one point, but then in the future, when you've developed, you've matured, they may expect more from you. So it's not as if we stay stagnant on one level. We do have to strive to become better. And the effort alone, as we know, pleases Krishna. Just to try, regardless of how you feel in the matter, just to think as well, have that a meditation. Is what I'm doing pleasing to Krishna? whether you know or not, in the moment, that is pleasing to Krishna. And then you can, just having that meditation. And by having that meditation, our spiritual master has also said that naturally your actions will start to, what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, your actions will start to be molded according to that meditation over time. Does that make sense? Is that okay? Is there anything else from anybody here? On the call?
Yeah. Hare Krishna, thank you for explaining this. Yeah, that's the starting point. That is the boosting point where we can elevate ourselves in the activities and the instruction from the spiritual master, own spiritual master. And that is the basic point he pointed out. And from there we can recharge ourselves to the upward direction so that gradually you can rise up to the standard level, which you explained that the future should be not in standing at what point, it should be elevating slowly and slowly. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Is there anything else, or should we finish there?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, it appears there is no other person to make any question or comment. So yes, you can close the class. Thank you very much for the very nice class. Thank you once again.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Vancha kalpatarubhyascha
Bhyo eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki jai.
Ki jai.
Ki jai.
Ki bol.
Gaur Premanande Hari Hari.
Hari Hari Bol.